to do that. So because I just moved this whole computer around, though, Anne, would you mind passing me those notes over there? We're a little discombobulated for those of you on the call because we didn't quite know that Reema was not feeling well. So here's the book, though. That means you'll have to come back and sign this copy for us, Reema.
I will. I'm so sorry. How many people are in the room?
So there's 5 of us in the room, and there's another 5 on the computer, and I don't know how many, if those are groups of folks or not, actually, because I can't see anybody else besides you.
Well, if you don't mind me swinging by sometime later when I'm not contagious,
yeah.
I would love that.
It's really going around too, so.
Yeah.
So anyway, to everybody on the call, I think that you have read about Reema and you've read her book, and we're just really excited to welcome her here. She's a Portland author who, this is her first book, and it was quite a hit, and it's been really moving for a lot of us, Reema, to read it and to experience it and to just get to know you. And so it's really been a wonderful kind of journey. And so the fact that you say, or that the copy says it's a shared memoir, I think that a lot of us really feel that, that we related to a lot of what's in there. So we're going to let you talk about that. And I'm going to what I'm going to do for everyone on the call is just kind of give a couple prompting notes and let Reema go ahead and answer them. And then again, if you do have questions for those on the call, and then of course those in the room, I'll moderate the questions as well. Okay.
Wonderful. Yes.
So I think I would start with this first question that we kind of talked about a little bit, which is, critics have called the book timely and timeless, and I really related to that myself. But I think maybe it'd be nice if you could talk a little bit about what do you think, readers, why would they say that it's timely and timeless?
Because right now, more than ever, the female condition is being given a microphone, and so it's timely to have this conversation, but it's also such a timeless conversation for us to be talking about gender equality, for us to be talking about women freeing and amplifying our voices, and to unapologetically ask for the respect, dignity, love, and kindness that we deserve through cultures, through generations.
Yeah, I think so too. So, this book is very personal, very shared with your family members, your actual family members, and actual people that you've known. I think personally, as a writer, memoir writing is kind of really hard because of knowing that people that we know would read it.
Right.
And all of us as writers need to kind of put the editor aside, but during the writing process, I was really curious how that was for you. Were you intentional in who you decided to keep as characters? Because I'm sure there's lots of people who weren't, who are a part of your life who didn't show up in the book as characters. And careful about those who you knew were becoming characters in the book, what you did write about them. How did you navigate all that?
I just chose the characters who have had the most impact and influence in my life. I was dating someone while for the first few months of writing this book, and I remember him asking, "Am I in the book?" And I said, "No, you're not," because he was just a passing through one season boyfriend. And then I said, you've neither been like a super impactful villain nor super impactful love of my life. So I'm sorry you didn't make the cut.
That's great.
That's excellent. What was his response?
We broke up soon afterwards. I don't, well, he is a reader, but I don't think he knew much about a writer's process. So he probably thought I was being a bitch. But I was just being honest. It's a very writerly thing to say, isn't it? Well, I'm just selecting the characters who have had the most impact on my narrative. And some of those characters would be, an orphan child whom I had the privilege of taking care of for one summer in my life. And then my mother, whom I've known longer than any other human being. It doesn't matter. It's not the actual time span, but the depth of resonance that person has had in your life and the depth of teaching that they've imparted in you. Yeah. And because my measurement for deciding which characters to keep were always the depth of growth and the depth of challenge. And so, that's why there was just one scene, but a very impactful scene about this rapist that came into my life and the echoing life lessons from that one night. And then the husband, the marriage years, you see me change the kind of, the way I play with narrative time, where although that relationship spans only 2 years, it takes up a third of the book. Whereas the childhood years, which are from age infancy to 24, those take up 1/3. And I used a different kind of narrative pacing to condense everything there because it made sense for that. And then for his section of 2 years, I switched into a different kind of narrative pacing that made sense for the larger arc of this woman and what she goes through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe we can talk a little bit more about the writing process a little bit later on.
Right.
Of course, I want to know that and nerd out on that, but just for other folks who maybe want to know a little bit more about some of the content.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, there's so many things happening in the book. There's so many layers. So definitely you talked about, the experiences of women. Some people have already said that hits pretty close to home. Certainly the scene of the assault is incredibly, I really appreciate it because it's actually from the point of view of the woman, which often in literature these days, that is not the case.
Right.
And so I think that makes it so impactful in a different way. But I'm just kind of, I think some of the other things that are important, especially in terms of the timeliness and time, are around what it's like to be an immigrant into the United States. And in your story, and the narrator's story, there's a lot of immigration that happens and a lot of, also movement from place to place. So how did you decide to weave that part in the story of immigration into the book? And also looking back 4 years, has it been 4 years?
It has. Since I wrote it, yeah.
Yeah, since it was written. Has that changed since many things have changed in our kind of public consciousness about immigration? Definitely.
So I'm working on the screenplay now, and I'm putting much more attention on the immigrant through line because it's just as, not that, for me, I'm much more conscious of its resonance now than I was when I sat down to write the manuscript. When I was writing the manuscript, the thing I was most conscious of was the female arc, the heroine's journey. And now understanding that side by side, it's kind of the journey of marginalization and the different kinds of ways that anybody who is a marginalized person can be abused. And so that's initially, and so in the book, the way that the immigrant through line came in was just naturally the way that it's occurred in my life. I try not to, or I discipline myself not to get too conceptual and cerebral about the way I write, because then it'll make things too thought driven versus feeling and emotion driven, and sensorial kind of gut feeling driven. And so, yeah, even if I know that, okay, part of my life story has cultural relevance in this way, I try not to think too much about it. And I trust that just by putting down the truth of my life, it'll speak on social nuances.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, I'm sure. But yeah, that must be an interesting experience writing the screenplay now, 4 years later, with the shift in culture. So, so here's what's funny about what
I was going to say, especially because over the last couple of years, ever since I launched a speaking career, I coined the term immigrant abuse, and I've been using it to finally, for us to have language around the specific subsection of intimate partner violence, when a partner uses the threat of deportation as a way to exploit, control, and intimidate the immigrant partner, which is what my ex-husband did to me. He not only had me financially cowering in fear, because all of our money was under his name, all of our property was under his name. So financially, I was trapped in a way that many women find themselves trapped, because they have devoted their lives to building the life of a man under the name of a man. So if a marriage turns abusive, our first thing is, well, I don't have the finances to leave.
Right.
So that was going on. And then additionally, he started threatening me with the threat of deportation were I to ever speak out against him. And I realized, well, even for my own sanity, I need vernacular to talk about this. And so I came up with this term, immigrant abuse. And the moment I started speaking it into society, people started saying, oh my gosh, me too. Yes, exactly in the way that it happened to you in your book, in your life, that happened to me as well, or that happened to my sister, or that happened to my aunt. And that's the power of language. Once we have coined specific vocabulary of the different kinds of actions people have used to abuse other people, we're starting to formulate a game plan to not only talk about these things, but then find solutions for these things. And it validates the woman's experience. It validates the victim's experience. Domestic violence wasn't a term until 1973, when a man named John Ashley, he used it in his speech to the Parliament of the United Kingdom. And the moment he put those two words together, women around the world started saying, me too, me too. Now I finally have something to point to and say, that's what's happening to me. And perhaps I shouldn't rationalize this. Perhaps I shouldn't forgive it as, oh, he comes from a wounded childhood. It's an actual form of abuse. And so immigrants for so long have said, I can't do anything, I'm trapped. But the moment you coin a term, you also codify validation to speak up and speak out for our rights.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And, that's what's such an interesting point and part of your book, the way the narrator's constantly kind of recognizing how language shapes reality. And within her own personal story, within looking at other people's, like about poverty, say, working with the orphan or other groups. So I think that's super powerful.
Right. And if language shapes reality, that also means that language can be used to punish and language can be used to empower.
Exactly. And we choose that as individuals for ourselves and how we speak, and then speaking out about our experiences if other people are trying to take that power away.
Absolutely. I think there was a question over here.
So you can you see it?
I saw, here we go, there's the chat. Yep.
You
Question for Reema. Sure. When you quit your acting career and moved to Oregon, did you ever doubt your decision to write your book? If so, how did you push through the self-doubt to keep writing your memoir? I feel like to be human is to grapple with self-doubt every day. It just manifests in different ways. I mean, I think self-loathing, it's a rare person who doesn't grapple with themselves every day, and it just, yeah, it takes different shapes. And I think I was fortunate in a perverse way that because of the father I have, from the time I was a toddler, I started recognizing that I had to figure out how to manage my identity around his switching moods. Because on Monday, he would shower me with praise and love and affection and encouragement and tell me that I was the voice to empower generations. And on the following day, he would treat me like I was invisible and would scold me for even coughing. Mm. And until I would hold my breath and I would pass out. I would literally hold my breath until I would pass out. And so, subconsciously, I realized that, and in a way, he's kind of like the exaggerated metaphor of life, but in the form of a father figure, and or like patriarchy in the form of a father figure. One day they love you, the other day they hate you. And so I had to figure out a toolkit, like emotional tools of how to negotiate the space around him so that I couldn't rest my identity and my self-esteem on this person in a way that some children are fortunate enough to be able to rest their entire self-esteem on both parents. And that's like their sense of stability. Every day, mom and dad love me, so great. I'm deserving of love every day. I had these really strange, like incredibly loving mother who was also always silent with fear. Mm-hmm. And then a very vocal father who was vocal with affection and then vocal with derision as well. So all of it just forced me to come up with just a way to every day just pick myself up and say, I'm going to work and I'm going to show up regardless and independent to external praise, acknowledgement, or encouragement. Mm-hmm. And that has behooved me with a pretty stoic work ethic. And I think it's also it's like how I heal wounds, because my stepdad says I'm like a self-cleaning oven. Just like, okay, another fire, just gonna clean this puppy up. So like my answer is, we're all incredibly blessed with more than a handful of human beings who love us. And then we're all incredibly burdened by the handful or few handfuls of wounds that have befallen us. And so at the end of the day, we just have to we have to invent and teach ourselves. And once we teach ourselves, our job is then to pass it forward, because Toni Morrison says the function of freedom is to free someone else. Mm-hmm. Once you figure out a toolkit that helps you garner a sense of identity that is free of external criticism as well as free of becoming addicted to external praise, once you figure that toolkit out, you use it to do your work that God called you to do, and then engineer that work into becoming a method for other people to learn those same tools.
I used to, you know, you always teach what you have to learn. I used to teach a class, and basically the first thing was, the first rule of life is, if your self-worth is based on anything external, you are in big trouble.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And
Um,
that's why I have a long narrative around, oh, you're welcome, thank you. I have that narrative about how the final dragon to conquer for any of us is ourselves. The power battle we have within ourselves, that punishing voice. And if we can really heal it, heal that wounded inner child once and for all, it sets the foundation to do the work of living a healthy life, a healthy and fulfilling and generous life.
yeah. So do anybody in our group here, do you have any questions for Reema? So the optics are kind of funny. You're looking at me, Reema, but I'm looking at you on the computer. And I can't see if the questions come in. I need somebody else to tell me. So, but yeah, does anybody else just in our group here want to ask any questions or have any thoughts?
Reema?
Hi.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm Denise. I have the little dog, Jackie Chan. I've come to see you a few times.
Denise Baker. Hi.
Yes, hi, how are you? I'm sorry,
great,
I know that you're sick, and thank you for being here. I love your use of language. You are very skilled, and probably through your growing up, learning multiple languages, and then your discussion of the effect of language. And are you familiar with Vygotsky? And his idea that through language brings us to a higher level of understanding, that we can't grow without the language, or possibly that we won't grow as much without the language, what you just said, once there are words put there. And then the idea that we are social beings as well, that we need that language to communicate. So I know you were looking at that, and I just didn't know if you had any thoughts on Vygotsky and your feelings of language.
Well, you know how I say, like, to speak is a revolution.
Right.
And the couplet that's repeated throughout the book is, the voice is a muscle, and the more we use it, the stronger it grows. And the voice without intimacy will atrophy, which also means that the voice, if given love, even by oneself, will grow. So that pretty much sums up what I think about language, that yes, it is. It's because language teaches us humor, it teaches us personality. It lets us discover what our personality is, because it's cause and response. And one of my favorite stories in I'm Yours is the one with Little Star, and how we see it with painful vividness what being starved of language and human touch and contact and connection and interaction can do to a human being. How Little Star not only had, little, to refresh your memories, Little Star was that little boy in the orphanage who had been born with all 4 limbs fused in place, and he didn't have rotator cuffs. He didn't have rotator cuffs in his shoulders or his elbows or his knees. And he had developed a starship-like shimmy to move across the floor, and the only muscles he could use was his torso. So he had this finely developed little six-pack, but the rest of his muscles on his arms and legs, because they had never been used, had atrophied. And because of his very stark appearance, he received the least amount of human interaction in the entire orphanage, leading him to grow to the maximum size of a 1-year-old, although when I met him, he was 4 years old, and leading him to have only a 4-phrase vocabulary. He knew thank you in Thai, kapun kap, sawadee kap, which means hello, ahan, which means food, and nam, which means water. And we could have said that his vocabulary was only 4 phrases because of a learning disorder, but that would be a lie told to comfort ourselves. The truth is he knew only 4 phrases because he was given less love than any other child in that orphanage. He was denied human contact, and human contact, most importantly, leads to human language. And through back and forth, through knowing that we are being heard, is how we grow. And he was such a visible, visceral representation of the truth, that the voice is a muscle, and without love, that muscle that is the voice, without use, that muscle that is the voice will starve the soul that contains it.
Thank you. I do remember, and I do love that you are bringing this truth out in your writing that is being heard again by a new audience and in a new way, as should be in life for a new generation. And I'm just so excited that you wrote this book. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Denise. Thank you. Next question, do you still work with children? I love those stories from the book. Thank you. I do, in different capacities, where one is the book was adopted into several high schools through an innovation grant from the Oregon Department of Education. So while I was on book tour there during the spring in 2019, I was also I did 33 school visits to do writing workshops with high schoolers throughout Oregon. And so that was only with 3 high schools. And now, so I'll get to travel and meet more students. And they are absolutely my favorite bunch, because they have no filter when it comes to what they want to talk about. And it's also, I feel an even deeper responsibility with whenever I speak to them. I'm so aware of the tremendous responsibility of every single word coming out of my mouth, because with them it's about preventative care versus recovery, you know, and to be able to be given an opportunity to intercept and interrupt a young person's life before they fall into an abusive relationship with a person, or just as they're starting to feel the beginnings of anorexia or self-loathing, if I can just sneakily interrupt them and bring them this book, and because there was also a curriculum designed around it, a curriculum specifically designed for 20 writing lessons that help our young people use the craft of writing to turn their personal traumas into empowerment for themselves. To be able to equip them with this toolkit is such a huge honor. And so I take that work very seriously. And anytime there's an opportunity to work with a school to help them integrate trauma-informed curriculum into their work, to help them, you know, with an empowerment workshop, that's my favorite work, honestly. You know. So if you know of any schools, if you're a parent, I work a lot with, it's usually, that's how it starts, where a parent and an audience will say, I want this in my children's school, and it just naturally happens through there. It's organic. I think, you know, we're all mothers in some way. I'm not a biological mother, but I think that part of us is always alive. We're always looking for ways to nurture the incoming generation. So many audience members will just run with this and then go and connect with those people who have direct links to children.
Yeah, Oregon is lucky to have you on that level. I know. Are there other questions from the group, or Dan, you'll have to tell me if there's any coming up on the screen. Otherwise, I kind of wanted to talk just like in terms.
There is another question.
Oh, is there another question?
It's a great question.
Can you see that one?
Yes. Margaret, thank you, Margaret. You end the book as you are returning to New York. What did you do when you went back? What brought you back to Oregon? What have you been doing in the last 3 years? I love that. That's the first time anyone's asked me in that manner. So I'm very active on social media too, if you wanted to keep check on me from day to day. So you end the book as you return to New York. So I left that as a specific cliffhanger. And in my mind, when I wrote that, it was specifically about going to New York when I was about to meet the woman who would become my literary agent. For me, that's what the scene means, because that was a real scene, and it was the first time in my life that I actually returned to New York from Oregon after writing the book. I made a deal with myself that I wouldn't return to New York until I secured my dream writing agent, literary agent. And so, and her name is Lisa Demona. So that's what that scene is about, is I'm going to meet her and sign the contract, which led to how you guys and I met. And so that was a short trip, and I'm still living in Oregon. I haven't, I go back and forth to New York quite often because of work and conferences and things like that. And what have I been doing the last 3 years? I've just, so the book, once you write a book and then you hand it over to a literary agent, and then you spend a good chunk of time editing it. And so Lisa and I and her incredible assistant, Nora, who was my copy editor, we edited the book for about 9 months. And when I sent her the manuscript, it was draft number 4. And it was when I was still working at KinderCare. And I wrote the most audacious query letter. A query letter is a cover letter in the writing industry. And I told her my business plan and the vision I had of how I would become a speaker for immigrant rights and women's rights, and how I would take certain themes in the book, such as, healing from childhood trauma and sexual assault, and how I would scale that into essays as well as speaking events. And I wrote that all in this cover letter, and I just sent it off to her. And she read the manuscript, and she read the letter, and she decided that vision would come true. And so she offered representation to me. And so for the last 3 years, that's essentially what I've been doing, is once the manuscript was edited and out of my hands, that was in the summer of 2016. And Lisa started shopping it around to various publishers. And I said, okay, so what's my job now? And she said, well, go start writing personal essays and getting them published in the world's leading outlets. And I said, okay, great. And so I got off the phone and I Googled, what is a personal essay? And in the meantime, she emailed me, I think it was a BuzzFeed article of the top 20 places you want your personal essay to be published. And it was like Guernica, The Guardian, all of these places. And I was like, okay, great, this is my list. And so I just went at it, and I just started writing personal essays. And I knew that in the same way that, when you're planning for a movie that's about to go into distribution, that's about a movie that's going to launch into movie theaters, there's about a whole year's worth of interviews that the actors and the director and the writers and the producers start doing, all in a way to build up the promotional engine of the movie. And although I'd never studied becoming a producer or a director, I was an actor for a long time, and I still am. So I'm very attuned to the business side of how to build up the promotion and kind of like when an airplane is on the tarmac and you're building up speed to launch into the air, there's all of this other engineered commotion, as part of the advertising campaign, essentially. And so I knew that there were pivotal themes in the book that I could start creating standalone essays on. that all would come back to this mothership that is the memoir. Because the memoir, it's really hard to summarize it in one sentence because it holds so many different narrative threads. And so, there's the anorexia through line, mother and daughter relationship, her relationship with her abusive husband and how she found her voice through that, how she heals sexual assault, how she finds self-love, all of these different things that come up into a cohesive whole, but could be branched off into essays. So I started doing that. And that in turn helped develop and brand me as this voice that was speaking about these specific things. And so people started recognizing me as being a thought leader in these fields. And I started just performing parts of I Am Yours at readings around town. So, whenever you go to a book reading, most authors will come up there and they'll read something off of pages or off of their tablet or their phone, and it's an essay they have written. So because I'm obnoxious, I would memorize chapters from I Am Yours, and I would go up there and I would perform it as a piece, and I would act it. And people started saying, like, oh, have you seen this kid? She's Reema Zaman. She's doing something different, and she calls it spoken memoir. Mm-hmm. And so in that way, I just started very authentically creating my own noise and getting recognized for it. And then I started pitching myself. And then Trump got elected in November 2016. And I was like, I'm not going to wait to get published to speak, to launch a speaking career. I'm going to do it now, because what I have to offer is very, very culturally relevant right now. Women need to hear that we are important and our voices matter right now. I can't wait until an imaginary publisher down the road launching my book for me. And so I started pitching myself to colleges and universities and saying, you need to hire me as your speaker. And so people did. And my sister is, my brother and sister, like you guys have read about these two little kids in the book. So they're all grown up now. And you know how you read about my sister leaving for University of Oregon? And she was in her sophomore year when I wrapped up writing I Am Yours, and I was now about to launch my speaking career. Oh, my mom's here. My mom came with medicine.
Get her on the
Yeah. Hi, Mama. Oh, thank you so much. She brought me medicine.
Oh,
I love you so much. Thank you.
Do you want me to put these away?
No, I'm fine. Thank you so much. Thank you. I love you. She was like, are you dying? And I said, well, aren't we all? And she said, no, stop joking. You need groceries. And she said, do you have any medication? And I said, I don't. So she brought me medication. But my sister, so she was in a sorority in the University of Oregon. And so she and we pitched me to be the empowerment speaker for one of their like yearly conference. And so that was my first gig. And we filmed that, and then we sent it to different sororities around the nation within like that sorority, and then other sororities too. And so then all of these different sororities started hiring me. Northwestern, PSU, all of these different places, because the younger generation is always quicker on moving and getting things done than like waiting for like a team of faculty to raise the funds. The young girls were like, no, this is what we want to talk about. We want to talk about, how to heal and rise from sexual assault. Like, it's not even about awareness anymore. We know, we're aware. Now we need the tools for like how to heal from it. So all of these things and it just snowballed from there. And it's all I've been doing for the last 3 years has pretty much been this. Culminating in this giant book tour that was supposed to be 1 month, but it ended up being 4 months. because there's a need for conversation of this manner. And then sometime last year, I was on Cheryl Strayed's podcast in August called Dear Sugars, and that kind of launched me onto a national level because Cheryl asked me to be the special guest speaker to talk about emotional abuse and how I navigated that marriage in my 20s. And that projected me onto this like really loud national level, and from there more opportunities came, one being that over Twitter, I heard from a woman named Dara Resnick, who is a producer and screenwriter in LA, and she said, you know, this is the story I've been dying to tell, and whatever, do you have plans to turn this into a movie? Because if so, I would love to do it, or do it with you, or help you in any way. So that's how that came. And that's literally all I do. That's what you can probably tell. Like I live in a bare, empty room with a desk and a laptop, and I make sure people were always asking me like, "Are you going to move back to New York? Are you going to move to LA?" And thus far, as my life has grown bigger, and now I just signed with this incredible speaking agency in Santa Barbara. So like now I'm traveling everywhere to speak. I'm going to Penn State in a few months, things like that. The bigger my life has grown, the more cognizant I am of like how important it is to be near a handful of people who know me very well. And my safety is always my mom and my dad. And the way I describe them in the final act is exactly how they are. And they are the personification of love. And so I love being here for as long as I possibly can before I have to move to LA when filming begins for the movie. That was a very long-winded way.
Okay. Can you hear her?
Can you hear me if I'm talking at this level?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you, Reema, for being here. Hearing you describe your authentic process and your career trajectory, it sounds like it's something you personally created. I wonder if you have any female authors or activists or actresses that have done like a similar path to you, and that's where you've drawn inspiration, or if you literally just cooked this up in your kitchen and this was your vision. I'm just wondering if you drew inspiration from anyone. Right.
Oh, I draw inspiration from everyone all the time. I think when it comes to, I think that this is how, I guess I have more of a, like a startup or entrepreneurial mindset than like a writerly or author mindset. I think the traditional route for a writer is to, go get a bachelor's and then go get an MFA. And for me, that's never really appealed to me. I have like you read, like I have a women's studies and theater degree. And then I consume business books, and I love podcasts and Malcolm Gladwell, and I read business books and that kind of stuff a lot. I love analyzing society and seeing where trends are going and pattern recognition. I consume as much literature as I do pop culture to listen to what the musicians are doing and what Beyonce is doing and what J-Lo's doing and what Hillary Clinton is talking about, but also Marianne Williamson, and just kind of, there's always like pattern recognition to be had, and to then also see like what are the critics of all of these women saying, because you can tell a lot by the way that people are angered by powerful women. You can tell a lot about like where society is just about to explode. Like, critics always make noise whenever, and make noise when, and that noise is always like the dying gasps of a creature that knows its days are numbered. you know? And so, like, that's kind of how I draw inspiration. Because I consume massive amounts of content every day, and I live by myself. And so one thing I haven't been doing for the last 3 years or almost 4 years is I haven't dated anyone. I've just been in this like really solitary process of figuring out what feminism needs for this like next wave. And what I know is like we have all suffered from rage, and rage is a decisive strategy that results only in more division. And now is the time for empathy, love, decency, and integrity, because the first thing we all need to do is acknowledge the generational wounds that have traumatized every human being. And we need to heal those wounds and then build a foundation from that. And that's how I feel like socially, artistically, politically, that's what we need. I don't even know if I answered your question.
You did.
That's kind of my daily process is, yeah, I read a lot, but I make sure to be like consuming media a lot too, because I think it can, you know, like literature is such a beautiful part of humanity, but we have to also look at like the disgusting part of the news cycle to know what we need to produce to heal that disgusting part. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I have a question. You know, here at JVC Northwest, we talk about our values a lot: community, simple living, social and ecological justice, and spirituality and reflection. I just was wondering if, I mean, you have a lot of, you know, very clear ways about talking about, you know, your life and the structure of the book, and even what you were just saying about, you know, how you structure the career. But I just was wondering if you have any values by which you live.
Yeah, it's like everything we've just talked about: love, decency, integrity, and empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to really unapologetically and openly personify love. I think I've been told like the most surprising thing about me, or the most radical thing about me, is how unflinching I am with saying the word love, like passing it around like Skittles. Everything I do is like, and then also to celebrate women's achievements and my own achievements, because, and I think those two things go hand in hand. There's the world like has become so cynical and pessimistic and wounded and tortured, and all of it requires like a great deal of patience and empathy and healing, and it begins with us like just giving love more to each other, but beginning with ourselves. I just don't have time for being tortured. I don't have any time for being self-deprecating. I've kind of had it with women, like, you know, constantly putting ourselves down and thinking that it's charming.
Right.
It's over it, you know, because it doesn't do us any favors. And so I just love like, yeah, just being happy and being, you know, spreading happiness and raising each other up and doing it unapologetically.
I love that. Yeah. And I think that's such a...
I was just gonna say, there are billion-dollar industries that create and profit from women's insecurities. And so whenever a woman stands up and says, I have been the hero of my journey, and I believe you, sister, are also the hero of your journey. What we are doing is not some hocus pocus bullshit. What we are doing is an actual revolutionary act of dissent.
I love it. Well, I want to ask. Oh, yes.
No hocus pocus bullshit.
I'm gonna we can't live tweet, but I'm gonna have to go back and just be like, here's all the genius things Reema said.
Cool.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah.
you know, and I don't know if other folks on the call or in the room have any last kind of questions, but I'm just conscious of the time and also the fact that Reema is not feeling well. So.
Oh, I'm great now. I'm happy that you guys have fed me. So yeah.
We were that adrenaline rush there. But yeah, I just think that, you know, I have so appreciated the way that your book really does lift up what all the social justice intersections are and how they relate. And, you know, it really goes back to like some of the longest, you know, radical feminists, you know, that I can think of who really always come around to love in the end.
Right.
But we also have to look at the systems that lead to these billion-dollar industries, or, you know,
Right.
what happens if a woman does report, you know, being raped by somebody. And, you know, there's so many ways that the reasons why we haven't spoken up have been systematized, you know, and so
Right.
speaking is really a way to systematize justice.
Mhm.
Because we start with the art and then we can change, like, you know, the policy, like you're talking about. If we call it immigrant abuse, then it's a different kind of policy that we can create. So I just really appreciate so much of that, and I'm just excited to stay with your book and keep it. And I wanted to let the folks on the call know that Reema and I had talked a couple times, and I actually listened to Reema's book on audio, which I've never listened to a whole book on audio in my whole life. And of all the books to listen to, this was such a great one to listen to, because Reema's the reader, and since she knows how to perform, the voices are excellent. You really need to hear her do the white dude voice. It's excellent. It's the best.
I've had a lot of experience.
So I just want to recommend that, like, if you've got to kind of experience it again, that's a great way to experience it as well. And I don't really say that very often about books, because I like to read more than I like to listen. So,
Thank you so much.
I just feel like, you know, you've been so generous with your time, and we so appreciate you. I kind of want to open up everybody else's mute so they could say anything, but do you have any last thing you want to say before we'll let you go to sleep?
Oh, you're so sweet. I thank you so much for having me, and it's such an honor. And I'm very easy to find on social media. So Reema Zaman on Instagram, same with Facebook and Twitter. And please do drop me a note, send me an email. Let's connect further. If you have more questions that'll come up later on tonight or later this week or this month, I'm very available.
All right. Well, okay, I'm going to open up I'm going to unmute everyone so you can say thank you. And we just really appreciate you, Reema. Thank you so much, and we certainly hope you feel better.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
It was wonderful to hear you.
It's wonderful to hear you. Thank you.
I love your Love Letter Mondays on Facebook.
Thank you, Denise. That's my favorite to write. Thank you so much, everyone.
All right.
It's such a privilege to be here.
Feel better.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.